At the turn of the century, many historians wrote cutesy fluff pieces in the media about who had been the most influential person of the 20th century. Many names were floated: Hitler, Stalin, Churchill, Einstein, Gandhi. One name that didn't appear on many lists was that of Frederick Taylor. While Frederick Taylor's name is not known to most people, his impact on the 20th century was quite profound.
Taylor was a management theorist, a theorist of the labor process.
In an era where the capitalist firm was becoming larger and larger, employing more and more workers, a fundamental problem was emerging. How do we get workers to work more? Of course, this had always been a problem for capitalists, but the rapidly expanding size of the factory was demanding more nuanced control over workers to ensure maximum output.
During the late 1800s and early 1900s, Frederick Taylor experimented with, studied, and wrote about the theory of work. His goal was to find a way of controlling the motions of workers so as to attain the highest maximum output per dollar spent on wages. His writings are an incredibly frank and lucid distillation of the theory of class struggle from the capitalist perspective. Very rarely do we see the capitalist class engaging in such frank and open discussions about the nature of exploitation. The frankness of his writings almost eliminates the need for interpretation, and thus much of this video will just be excerpts from his own writing.
For Taylor, there was a fundamental problem afflicting modern society. Workers didn't work hard enough. Taylor called such laziness soldiering.
We can see our forests vanishing, our water power is going to waste, the end of our coal and iron is in sight. But the larger waste of human effort, which go on every day through such of our acts as are blundering, ill-directed, or inefficient, are less visible, less tangible, and are but vaguely appreciated.
Taylor is shocked that the inefficiency of workers hasn't created a national outcry.
As yet, there has been no public agitation for greater national efficiency. No meetings have been called.
Taylor was often upset that those around him didn't share his obsession with efficiency, and it was an obsession.
Taylor was obsessive-compulsive. As a child, he counted his steps and measured all of his motions so as to achieve the maximum efficiency of his own actions.
In his adult life, he sought to impose his obsessive compulsions on all those around him, and eventually the entire capitalist world. And the capitalist world was ready for a Taylor. In the late 19th century, capitalism was growing fast, competition was accelerating, the firm was growing in size, and with it, the number of workers employed on a single shop floor. The need for increased control over this mass of workers was growing, as was the need for them to work more efficiently to stay competitive.
In a majority of cases, the man deliberately plans to do as little as he possibly can, to turn out far less work than he is well able to do. In many instances, to do not more than 1/3 to 1/2 of a proper day's work. This constitutes the greatest evil with which the working people of England and America are now afflicted.
For Taylor, a proper day's work meant the maximum level of output humanly possible. He often called it a fair day's work.
When workers were not physically capable of working a fair day's work, he fired them.
Why did workers soldier? Taylor never was able to give an answer to this question. To him, it represented one big misunderstanding between capitalists and workers. Actually, Taylor argued, there was no fundamental antagonism between workers and capitalists.
The majority of these men believe that the fundamental interests of employees and employers are necessarily antagonistic. Scientific management, on the contrary, has for its very foundation the firm conviction that the true interests of the two are one and the same.
Soldiering was made possible because capitalists didn't even know how much work it was possible to extract from workers.
The greater part of the systematic soldiering is done by the men with the deliberate object of keeping their employers ignorant of how fast work can be done.
Taylor's goal was to take this knowledge of work from the worker and put it in the hands of management to be used as a tool for control of workers. He called this scientific management.
As a science, management can refine the labor process to a point of efficiency far greater than any worker could achieve on their own.
The science which underlies each workman's act is so great and amounts to so much that the workman who is best suited to actually doing the work is incapable, either through lack of education or through insufficient mental capacity, of understanding this science.
Note the wording, workmen who are best suited. Who are these best suited workers? Well, workers who were too intelligent, too stubborn, or physically incapable of working at maximum output were not best suited for the job.
Taylor envisioned a perfectly harmonious social order where all workers were employed in occupations where they could work most efficiently. They would be accompanied by a strata of scientific managers who analyzed their emotions and reorganized them for maximum output. Anyone who didn't fit into this perfect vision of the world would be fired.
The greatest prosperity can exist only when the individual has reached his highest state of efficiency. That is when he is turning out his largest daily output. The search for better, more competent men was never more vigorous than it is now. It is only when we fully realize that our duty as well as our opportunity lies in systematically cooperating to train and to make this competent man that we shall be on the road to national efficiency.
The entire structure of production and society would revolve around the creation of this new efficient human.
In the past, man has been first. In the future, the system must be first. The fundamental principles of scientific management are applicable to all kinds of human activities, from our simplest individual acts to the works of our greatest corporations. The same principles can be applied with equal force to all social activities, to the management of our homes, the management of our farms, the management of the business of our tradesmen, large and small, of our churches, our philanthropic institutions, our universities, and our governmental departments.
We can just imagine how satisfying such a rationalized fantasy world must have seemed to his obsessive-compulsive mind. A big part of this fantasy world was Taylor's concept of harmony between classes. Taylor believed that all the workers he was retraining to work harder were his personal friends, and that he had their best interests at heart, even if they didn't know that. He persisted in this fantasy even when workers threatened to kill him.
The men who were under me were my personal friends. I used every expedient to make them do a fair day's work, such as discharging or lowering the wages of more stubborn men who refused to make any improvement.
Taylor started his management career at the Midvale Steel Company outside Philadelphia.
As soon as I became gang boss, the men who were working under me and who, of course, knew that I was on to the whole game of soldiering or deliberately restricted output, came to me at once and said, "Now, Fred, are you going to be a damn piecework hog, are you?" I said, "If you fellows mean you were afraid I'm going to try to get a larger output from these lathes," I said, "yes, I do propose to get more work out." I said, "You must remember I have been square with you fellows up to now and worked with you. I've been on your side of the fence, but now I have accepted the job under the management of this company, and I'm on the other side of the fence, and I will tell you perfectly frankly that I'm going to try to get a bigger output from those lathes." They answered, "Then you are going to be a damned hog." Now that was the beginning of a piecework fight that lasted for nearly 3 years, as I remember it, in which I was doing everything in my power to increase the output of the shop, while the men were absolutely determined that the output should not be increased. I began, of course, by directing some one man to do more work than he had done before, and then I got on the lathe myself and showed him that it could be done. In spite of this, he went ahead and turned out exactly the same old output and refused to adopt better methods or to work quicker until finally I laid him off and got another man in his place. This new man, I could not blame him in the least of circumstances, turned right around and joined the other fellows and refused to do any more work than the rest.
Notice how he says he can't blame this man for not wanting to work harder. In several of Taylor's accounts of the Midvale Steel battle, he does admit to some sort of fundamental antagonism between workers and managers.
As a truthful man, I had to tell them that if I were in their place, I would fight against turning out any more work, just as they were doing, because under the piecework system, they would be allowed to earn no more wages than they had been earning, and yet they would be made to work harder.
Taylor was convinced that workers needed a material reward for working harder. A fundamental part of his theory of scientific management was the permanent raising of wages for workers who conformed to this new scientific work ethic. Taylor thought that capitalists would consent to higher wages because the increased cost of higher wages would be compensated for by the increased size and output, and the diminished size of the workforce. But, to Taylor's great dismay, once new levels of efficiency had been reached, most employers chose to slash rates, and wages returned to normal or even lower. In fact, the effect of scientific management was to reduce the skill set of the working class as a whole, which in turn reduced labor's bargaining power and lowered wages. It seemed there were some fundamental class antagonisms immune to Taylor's utopian philosophy. back to the battle at Midvale Steel.
I hunted up some especially intelligent laborers who were competent men, and I deliberately taught these men how to run a lathe and how to work right and fast. And every solitary man, when I had taught them their trade, one after another turned right around and joined the rest of the fellows and refused to work one bit faster.
Taylor decided to take the next step. He said to the men,
"Now I'm going to cut your rate in two tomorrow, and you are going to work for half price from now on. But all you have to do is turn out a fair day's work, and you can work better wages."
Eventually, the men caved in, and production rose at the Midvale Steel Factory.
After that, we were good friends, but it took 3 years of hard fighting to bring this about.
Emboldened by this success, Taylor became a highly sought-after and successful management consultant. Over the years, he perfected this system of scientific management. Here's how the system worked. First, Taylor would observe the labor process as it existed. He cataloged all the motions of the workers and timed them. He then set about, through trial and error, devising the most efficient flow of motions possible.
There are many different ways in common use for doing the same thing. There is always one method and one implement which is better than any of the rest. And this one best method and best implement can only be discovered or developed through a scientific study and analysis of all the methods and implements in use, together with accurate, minute, motion, and time study.
No job was too simple or too complex. Taylor famously spent 26 years discovering the best way to cut metal. But simple work could be rationalized as well. In a famous example, Taylor sought to come up with a more efficient method for loading pig iron into a train car. Men had to pick up a piece of pig iron, walk up a plank, and drop the pig iron into a train car. On average, a worker could load about 12.5 tons of pig iron a day. After careful study, Taylor discovered that 47 tons a day was a proper day's work. He did this by analyzing the tiring effect of physical labor on muscle. He discovered that a man's muscles require a certain percentage of rest for an amount of work exerted. The trick was to time the ratio of work to rest for each worker so that they could work the hardest without tiring. The second step was to pick the right worker. Any old worker wouldn't do. In fact, only about 1 in 8 men could load 47 tons of pig iron a day.
With the very best of intentions, the other 7 out of 8 men were physically unable to work at this pace. Now the 1 man in 8 who was able to do this work was in no sense superior to the other men who were working on the gang. He merely happened to be a man of the type of the ox, no rare specimen of humanity, difficult to find and therefore very highly prized. On the contrary, he was a man so stupid that he was unfitted to do most kinds of laboring work even.
Taylor started with just 1 man, a large Pennsylvania Dutchman named Schmidt. These were his instructions to Schmidt.
"You will do exactly as this man tells you tomorrow, from morning till night. When he tells you to pick up a pig and walk, you pick it up and you walk. And when he tells you to sit down and rest, you sit down. You do that right straight through the day. And what's more, no back talk. Now a high-priced man does just what he's told to do, and no back talk. Do you understand that? When this man tells you to walk, you walk. And when he tells you to sit down, you sit down, and you don't talk back at him."
Taylor's next comments tell us more about this scientific selection of workmen.
This seems to be rather rough talk, and indeed it would be if applied to an educated mechanic or even an intelligent laborer. With a man of the mentally sluggish type of Schmidt, it is appropriate and not unkind, since it is effective in fixing his attention on the high wages which he wants and away from what, if it were called to his attention, he probably would consider impossibly hard work.
Throughout his writing, Taylor stresses the idea of selecting only workers who are able to work at the very highest level of efficiency. This always meant firing all the other workers. Taylor had no sympathy for these displaced workers.
And indeed it should be understood that the removal of these men from pig iron handling, for which they were unfit, was really a kindness to themselves, because it was the first step towards finding them work for which they were peculiarly fitted.
The result was a drastic reduction in the number of workers employed, and at the same time a rise in output. Workers were given raises, though, as mentioned earlier, these raises usually did not stay in effect. Meanwhile, the size of management grew. There was an office where labor was planned out. When workers came to work in the morning, they were given a set of written instructions as to how exactly to work. Time-study men patrolled the factory floor, timing motions. There was a proliferation of managers. all dedicated to different aspects of labor control. Divorced from the knowledge of the labor process, the worker became less and less skilled. Work was more repetitive, and it was harder to bargain for higher wages when it was so easy for employers to replace the workforce. Taylorism was also fiercely resisted. It produced much shop floor conflict and militant strikes. Taylor consistently left this detail out of his own versions of his successes, claiming that
during the 30 years that we have been engaged in introducing scientific management, there has not been a single strike from those who are working in accordance with its principles.
Such blatant omissions were typical of a man who could not tolerate anything that interfered with his utopian vision of a planned, rational universe. While Taylor's perfect world, a world free of class conflict where worker and capitalist work toward a common goal of perfect efficiency, never came into being, his ideas about the labor process became part of the basic fabric of working life. The planning of motion in work and management's monopoly over the knowledge of work are a basic fact of the way we experience much of modern work. Scientific management is still taught in industrial engineering schools, and its concepts still inform the basic way workplaces are built and the way jobs are structured. While some of management theory has moved on since Taylor, the basic questions he was grappling with are still crucial. As the productive powers of labor increased rapidly over the course of the 20th century, there was much thinking about how production and society were to be organized, and how the worker would be habituated to the demands of capital. As we begin to look at the history of capitalist crisis, it will be important to keep these basic questions in mind.
There, I think that looks nice. Bob, what time is it?
The time?
Well, you looked at it not 2 seconds ago.
I wasn't thinking about the time. I was trying to find the easiest way of setting this table.
With your watch?
Sure, I was making a motion study.
Oh, Bob, not now.
Marge, if you'd study the motions you make when you set the table every day, I'll bet you'll find you're wasting a lot of energy. In fact, I'll bet there are better ways of doing almost everything around here. Now, take the simple job of setting this table. Women do it the hard way.
Oh, Bob, women can't run a house like a factory.
Why not? Think of the effort you'd save. Maybe you wouldn't be so tired at the end of the day.
If you think you can do it better, you try it for just one day. Anyway, never mind the motions just now. The table has to be set. They'll be here any minute.
How's the new job?
I like it. It's okay.
You're going to have it. I wouldn't trade with him.
Well, you don't realize what motion study can do, Dick. It works out just like better machines and better methods. Times have changed. It's a lot different than it was in the old days. Now, we're able to produce more and more stuff with less and less effort on the part of the guys who do the work. That's what motion study's for. We find out how the machines and tools and the methods of using them should be changed to make it easier for the operator. So, as I say, it makes your job as a foreman a lot easier.
Well, it sounds good.
It's more than sound. I can prove it. Maybe this will show you what I mean.
What's that thing? One of those pin boards we've been hearing about?
Uh-huh. The idea is to put all the pins in the board. Now, all the pins are chamfered, see?
Uh-huh.
They fit easy.
I see.
Just fill the board. Try different ways. Put all the pins in the holes and see which is the easiest method. Want to try it?
Sure, why not?
"40 seconds. That's just about average, Dick, for that method.
At least Bobby waited until after dinner to get that board out. He's even trying to get me doing a motion study for my housework. Let's watch them for a while.
Sure. You girls might like to try it later on. I still say a little motion study around the house would help your housework.
Ready with that watch?
Uh-huh.
Let's go.
"34 seconds.
What do you know? The first method took 40, but this one was faster and even easier. Instead of starting at one end, I'll start down here in the middle, so that both hands are working in line.
Good idea.
Ready?
Uh-huh. "23 seconds.
40 for the first method, and it seemed harder. And the time was only 23 on the easiest method. And I did it just by changing the motions.
See, that's just what I've been saying. That's what motion study does, Dick. You find out how to turn out more work with the same effort.